Welcome back to Operation Podcast, where we dive into the rewarding yet challenging journey of fatherhood while balancing demanding careers. Join us as we share real stories, practical advice, and meaningful conversations about being a present and an engaged father. So today we've got a really exciting episode. I'm sitting here with Dr. John, and John is a physician that works at a pretty prestigious hospital, and you've got a wealth of knowledge and experience. So can I just start asking a question? I understand that you've got some military experience, and I ask that, and I start with that because we have kind of a demographic of listeners, first responders and military members. So I think they'd kind of be interested to hear a little bit about your experience in the military.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify at the outset, I have a lot of experience in my organization, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the organizations. Yeah, it was funny growing up as a kid thinking, military is cool, John Wayne, different movies. My family, my brother and my dad always loved war movies, so we always watched them. And so when I got of military recruiting age, I was also looking for, how do I pay for college? And so this opportunity showed up, and so I enlisted in the National Guard. It was a challenging at times, but it was a great experience and one I certainly am proud of.
What year was this?
That would have been around 1985.
Okay. And your career field in the Guard?
Was 5 Lima, so avionics communication repair. So
how did you
to fix helicopter radios?
Really?
I was aiming to fly helicopters, but you can't enlist for that. You have to be in the Guard, and then you can apply for it.
Based off the MOS, I'm hearing this is the Army National Guard.
Yes.
Okay, outstanding. And so the world of avionics, is that, from my experience, being a reserve member, I was able to apply to a job I was interested in, and depending on how I scored on the ASVAB, depicted on whether I get that career or not. Was that your experience, or did you kind of fall into that?
So the recruiter talked about the opportunity to be around aviation would be a good boost when I went to apply for flight school. And so I picked that one out of all the MOSs to use. And then when I went to sign the form at the end of the intake, they had replaced it with satellite communication repair. I'm like, but no, sir, that's actually not what I was enlisting. So I'm sure we're trying to fill some quota, perhaps, and so, but switched it around and got it into the avionics.
It must be a difficult job to recruiters, if there's any recruiters listening. I know it's a kind of a special duty from what I understand. And yeah, you kind of spoke to meeting quotas, but yeah. Of course, these are people's lives, and you hope you put them into a career field that speaks to their strengths. And it sounds like it's kind of a leap between what you did for the Army and now what you do as a civilian doctor. I'll go back. How many years did you serve in the Guard?
I did the 6+2.
6+2. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. It's a little experience there. And you said did it kind of help you get that foot in the door with education costs and incentives?
It certainly supported education, and it certainly was a great learning experience. My unit also got sent to Operation Desert Storm, and so I got to go over to Saudi Arabia and experience that, which was another great experience. I mean, there were challenges there as well, but don't regret that one at all. That was an amazing learning experience, just being able to drive around in another country under those circumstances, being able to walk off a plane with a loaded rifle in a foreign country. It's very, very different. And then working with my unit, as a team to set up a logistics, our logistics for our unit in a base, navigating all the logistics of that was incredible. And of course, seeing how the military actually operated was amazing and very useful I've applied later.
Yeah, that's a good point. Being a Guard and Reserve member, you're balancing your civilian life with what you've volunteered to sign up for the service. So not speaking towards the active duty component, but in our world, it's so great on deployments to see it in action, because it's not our or it's not our full-time job, but we train to maintain a standard set by the active duty set by the Guard and Reserve, and we're expected to complement those components when we're asked, and it's pretty cool to see it in action, just like you said. I like that. Can you kind of, I still want to focus on your career a little bit because there's a lot of questions I have in the realm of fatherhood and parenting that lead into that. So tell me about the gap between avionics and moving into the role you have now.
So I finished my undergrad took so long that I finished my military obligation before I finished my undergrad. So it took a long time. And it's funny because fatherhood actually was part of that delay. So became a parent very early in the process. And so even as I was enrolling, as I was going to Saudi Arabia, I already had a child at home that I was leaving. It was about 6 months total. By the time we got there, the war was pretty short,
Okay.
the first Gulf War. And so we were able to get back fairly quickly.
And what was that conversation and preparation like, having a young, how was it boy or girl? How old were they?
Daughter.
How old was your daughter at that point?
She turned 3 while I was there.
Wow. Okay. So very young, formative years. How does that family planning go, getting ready for a 6-month deployment overseas?
Involved a lot of family support, my wife.
Yeah.
From her parents and mine.
Excellent. And was the proximity pretty close between your in-laws and your parents?
Yeah, actually, we're all in the same city.
Oh, that's excellent. It's I can say that for myself too with our family. Our big move back to the city we live in now was 4 years ago, and the talks and the preparations were orbiting around that. How do we surround ourselves with family and community? And you're foreshadowing a little bit because it sounds like, and we'll maybe get into this a little later, you're taking that role now as a grandfather.
Right.
And we can get into that a little later if you'd like. But yeah, so 6 months in Saudi Arabia, and you're coming back and you're doing your undergrad at the same time. So let's kind of jump back into that now, how you entered a doctoral program and got all that completed.
So it was funny because before the Gulf War, I was still in the National Guard, but before the Gulf War, I actually had a lot of trouble. It was in Arizona, so it was the University of Arizona, and the financial aid department at the time, of course, this is the late 80s, early 90s, was struggling, and the financial aid kept getting later and later and later. Each semester I was there to the point where my grades tanked, and I actually failed out and then had to restart at Arizona State. And ended up taking, that's part of the delay and taking more time, having a child and navigating that. The way we managed it, in part, my wife and I always took time off, or not time off, we staggered our classes in such a way that one of us would start as early as possible and finish as early as possible, and the other one would start as late as possible and finish as late as possible, so that our daycare time was as short as could be.
Wow.
And so we were always staggering who was taking our daughter to daycare and who was picking her up, and organizing our classes around the daycare.
And what education was your wife pursuing?
Music education.
Wow. So you're both full-time students.
Hers is a double. So I got a double as well. So I got a bachelor's in chemistry and microbiology. And hers, she had to do all the education classes and the music classes. Yeah.
And I should preface for the listeners too, we're having this conversation. I'm very grateful you're here sitting with me talking, but you, at any moment, if you need to leave, we can pause and pick it up at another time. Please don't feel stressed or worried that you need to stick around, because I want to be respectful of your time. So, wow, that sounds like a lot of stress.
It was a lot. I also had to do the pre-med requirements. And so I was really fortunate. The pre-med advisor at Arizona State at the time was fantastic and had built a thing so that there was all of the requirements that you needed to be competitive were built into the pre-med class. So we got the shadowing done. They had it all set up with a outpatient doc and working in an emergency room. And so I got to do all kinds of medical experiences in preparation for the application process.
Wow.
And they had MCAT support. And so we was able to score well. And in spite of failing out at one point, I did manage to get into the MD Ph.D. program at Mayo.
Excellent. That's really impressive. You alluded to earlier that you had two primary focuses in school, and even now as a physician, are you double boarded? Is that what I'm understanding?
Single boarded, but family medicine is broad. And so you do, in this case, both outpatient clinic, hospital, and OB.
And what was it about family medicine that captivated your attention?
Variety. I was worried it was going to be a lot of coughs, colds, and sniffles, and those repetitively over and over again. I almost never see a cough, cold, or a sniffle.
Excellent.
It's all about life, how to manage multiple complex medical conditions simultaneously, and most of it, actually, to be honest, is mental health. Wow.
I hear you say that the trajectory of patients, birth to death, that's dense. That's a lot of stuff going on there.
I didn't expect it to learn what I've learned, because once you start seeing people getting through life and you notice that some will finish well and some do not, and you start seeing the patterns of what characteristics of the ones who finish well have and versus the ones that don't. And then you're like, one of my instructors in residency retired quite a few years ago and had said that at his retirement that he learned more from his patients than he ever taught. And it was funny because I don't remember other retirement speeches, but out of all of them, that was the one line that I remember and has stuck with me. And I think 20 years on now, I finally realize it. It's not just know it. It's like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I'm at a point where I've learned enough that I've learned more from the patients than I pass on.
So when you're walking into a room and the patient's there waiting for you, what's your newfound perspective?
Well, part of it is listening, for sure, because you want to listen to where they're coming from, where they're at, and then listening to what stories they're carrying, because those are what that make the difference between finishing well or not.
I want to jump back and forth between you as you mature through your career and as you mature as a father. So when you talk about comments of listening to your patients, let's take it back to your home life. How do those skills help you, one, as a husband, and two, as a father?
They took a very long time, unfortunately. So first child, the daughter, I thought I knew what qualities I wanted her to have as an adult, and it didn't match her personality, and that didn't go well. And then second daughter, I thought, well, maybe this time, and it turns out her personality matched what I was aiming for a little bit better, and so that went better. But we still had, I remember an interesting moment. I had coached her in soccer, and for me, the chess match between my team and the other team in terms of how do I utilize the players, what do I teach them, how do I teach them to play, what style of play, what formation to use, all of those things for me was just so much fun. And, teaching a bunch of elementary and middle school girls how to clobber other kids and teach them how to be aggressive. It was a lot of fun. And so I coached my daughter's team all the way up through 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, I hadn't grown up with soccer, so I had to learn it as I was going. But at some point you need to be able to do demonstrate what they need. And so I thought, well, it was time to move on and let her, learn from other coaches maybe that are more experienced in the game. And I remember just, part way into the season, she broke down crying and didn't want to go to practice. And she thought she was disappointing me because she thought I coached because I wanted her to be a player. I'm coaching for the fun of it. I hadn't communicated that to her well. And I realized that even though I don't necessarily have a thought or a feeling or a plan, other people may interpret it that way. And so I had to be I learned what story am I what story is she carrying? What is, it turns out the funny part was I had finally finished education and got my signing bonus and used it to get a nice camera that had like an f2.5 zoom lens that was very expensive so that I could take action shots indoors when she played basketball. And she switched to band because she loved band. And so I got these wonderful zoom shots of her playing in band. So you just, you move on. Third, so grandson now, so watching him grow, have a much better idea. Okay, he for whatever reason initially loved baseball, and growing up, I never really cared for baseball, and it's fun to watch when he's in it, but it's not a game that I would watch on TV or anything. And so it was funny that he decided his favorite game was baseball. So I had to pivot and just support him playing baseball. And that's what we did up through 8th grade before he got tired of it for a bit. And now he's playing football. So we've moved on to football. But knowing what my daughter's experience was, that to support him and what he's interested in, it's not about me or what I enjoy. And so the other thing, my second daughter, we always found interesting things to do that we would study and learn about together. And I think that was important. And then the grandson's been the same way, but I've learned to be more intentional about it, listening to what he's interested in, not necessarily what I'm interested. And now I've got a granddaughter that's coming up, age 5. She doesn't know what she wants. And so it's that challenge between encouraging to try things and then just allowing her to decide at some point what she enjoys and doesn't enjoy. And so it's a balancing act.
I've got a lot of follow-up questions to that. Well-spoken, well-articulated. Going back to that moment your daughter was able to describe her feelings to you, were you able to clearly respond in that moment, or did it kind of take you a little bit to address her concerns and how she was feeling?
I felt really bad, so I cried too.
Really?
And held her and said, it's okay. Yeah. And so what I did then is I just went on and coached other people's kids. So I volunteered and that was funny because I thought, well, elementary isn't so bad. So maybe like 5th grade or something. And so I volunteered for that. And I think U11 is what I volunteered for. And they sent me a note. Hey, are you okay? Here's a U11 team. Yeah, that's what I volunteered for. And sure. And then they sent me the roster, and it was, instead of like a dozen 11-year-olds, it was 17, 13-year-old girls. Like, wait a minute, this is middle school. And they go, oh, we're sorry, that was a typo. You now volunteered for a middle school team, and they were a blast. I had so much fun. And so I did that team 2 years up through 8th grade, and then went down and coached the grandson's team.
For the parents listening, moms or dads, I feel like, we're in a world now, especially on the theme of sports, it is all consuming. And when speaking to yourself, someone that has the prestige that you do and the career that you work in, you have the intellectual side and you have the academic side and the athletics. How have you found, going back to your comment earlier, respecting what your kids are interested in? How have you found a balance of not pushing your kids, your grandkids in the direction of something that you have found so much success in?
Well, the soccer was one of them. So the grandson did enjoy soccer some. And so I coached his team for a few years, a few seasons. And then he decided to move on, and I coached I actually enjoyed that cohort. And so I followed that cohort for a couple more seasons after he stopped playing soccer and he just focused on baseball. So
how about from an academic standpoint? Well, if the level that you've achieved academically, the role that you work in now, was it, as a father and as your daughters grew up, was it difficult I guess I should ask, was school something they struggled with? If not, was medicine something that you tried to have a path paved for them? If it wasn't your daughters, is it your grandkids? Kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so they watched me, and it was funny because the oldest daughter was watching, and we had a family friend that that was also in medicine in my group that she really identified with. And at one point, she had considered going into family medicine, but I did a prelim year of general surgery, and that it was right when they were just starting to have work hour restrictions. And so they weren't really enforcing it. And so my pager just wouldn't stop going off one day. I couldn't even mow the lawn without getting interrupted. And finally one day she just goes, "Your job sucks. I want to be a nurse." So we're like, "That's fine." At that point, we're like, that's fine. The youngest loved the research side of it. So thought about following and doing an MD PhD as well. But as they've grown, they've really kind of pivoted to what they enjoy. And I've learned enough now to be hands off and just let them do what they're going to do. They're adults, and they'll finish and find their path. One of my colleagues at University of Utah had, in an MD PhD program, had a struggle with substance use at one point and had been kicked out of a grad school program and attained sobriety, got back, finished the program, now got into an MD PhD program, and they made a documentary about her and they called it Winding Path. And I think that is probably the best description of most careers. A physician in my group, father-daughter team, where the daughter had said as a child, "I'm going to do what you do and work at the Mayo Clinic." And that's very unusual. Most people don't, they set a path like that, but then they don't, they find something else along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea of winding path. And so once you understand that mistakes are normal, and that's one of the things I learned both from my wife and from coaching soccer, is that you can't learn without mistakes. So people shouldn't be afraid of them, and they shouldn't feel like it's a reflection of utter failure of themselves, or the incompetence or disqualification or imposter syndrome. It's like failures are normal. You have to learn from mistakes. And if you don't, you're not going to learn anything if you don't make mistakes. And so that winding path, I usually have a diagram I show folks where you overdo, underdo. It's kind of a damped oscillator, kind of a graph where the wave goes up and down above a line, and it gets closer and closer and closer to the line. That's a growth curve, and those peaks and valleys are mistakes. And so when I learned from coaching is making sure that the parents understood that the players were going to make mistakes, and what we had to focus on was not the score or winning the game. It was about, are they doing something we did at practice? And that's the score that we kept. Did you do the scissors move? Did you do a back pass? Did you do a pass to space or feet? Whatever it was in practice, that was what we kept track of. And what I found, if you detach the score of the game out of the equation, they actually will learn better. They learn faster, because if they're afraid of losing a game and making a mistake, then they won't do anything new in a game. Then they don't learn as fast. So my teams almost always finish the season better than we started. And we usually ended with a winning season because they kept getting better and better and better. But I had to get the parents to stop focusing on the score. That was always a challenge. And I think that was part of why they say 90% of kids by 14 quit sports, is because the parents focus on the score. And that's what I've seen in patients as well.
We've talked about your experience with the family med, and the other side of that, which you alluded to earlier, is L&D, labor and delivery. And for the listeners, you're actually our family doctor. And I've spoken about our family and where we're at in our season, and you helped us deliver our daughter last week. I asked if I could get in there and assist in the delivery, both with my daughter and a year and a half ago with my son, and you were there too. And what I am really excited to hear you speak towards is, you've already spoken to it a little bit, but I'm interested to hear your lens of being in the room the moment a young man becomes a father, that very second, and what you've learned along the way as a young father, and now as a grandfather, and as a physician, and as a coach. Do you have the opportunity in your role to mentor or to see whether it's the body language of the dad or the relationship that they've cultivated in the marriage that you can kind of see from your lens in the delivery room. Can you speak to that?
There's a lot of, everyone brings their own life experience into that moment. And so there's a fair variety of responses from stunned disbelief. Some folks appear not to know what to think. They just kind of stand there and they're kind of, the affect is rather flat. Other folks are super excited. And it's not uncommon to have folks weep, especially on the first one, when they first have their first child. The couples often cry.
Tears of joy. Yeah, that was definitely our story. I don't know if I told you this, but I've always had an interest in labor and delivery. A couple of years back, we had a field delivery. It was a breech, a footling breech. And I remember walking into the bathroom. It's a little foot dangling there, and we could not get an ambulance there in time. So we delivered in the bathroom. Of course, I do not have the level of training that you do, but I knew the basics, and we had a successful delivery. In that moment, I thought, man, I thought about being a doula, a male doula, and I actually pursued some conversations with an organization and sat down with this woman and had coffee, kind of explained my intentions. And she's like, well, male doulas do exist. To my knowledge, there's 4 of them in the country, and one of them is under investigation. So the odds, I mean, we're not laughing out of injustice or anything like that. We're just, it takes one person to really ruin it for everybody else, right? To ruin it for the masses. And then I thought, well, maybe I should pivot and be, I coined the daddy caddy doula, where I'm in the room mostly alongside the dad, just kind of explaining what's going on, like a caddy, just saying, here's how you read the green in this scenario. And then maybe we leave the delivery room later after a successful delivery, go smoke a cigar in the parking lot or whatever, smoke and joke and have a handshake. But yeah, it's such a powerful moment. You're witnessing the miracle of life over and over and over. Does it ever get mundane? Does the captivation of the moment still excite you after all these years?
It's always humbling. Among the things that I've learned and watched is the life is transient. Death is normal, it's natural, and it's inevitable. And so once you start seeing that and understanding that, it's almost freeing to be in the moment. And so, to sit and watch this new person arrive, and it's just very humbling, and it's kind of a reminder sometimes of the whole transience of things. Never loses the magic.
That's cool. That's cool to hear. Have you found a routine talking to young parents young couples that are preparing to be parents? Are there conversations that you found helpful to get them ready, or to maybe shatter or build up their expectations?
Great question, because when we get to those folks at the end of life who are satisfied versus dissatisfied, some of those characteristics, you can set the parents up to help that child get there satisfied. And so how do we help this new couple, working on raising a child? How do we help them get it so that child finishes life, satisfied? And so some of the things that, as I learn the difference between satisfied and dissatisfied, then I can start providing a little bit more coaching along the prenatal care journey. Part of it is always thinking about the life trajectory. So every parent comes into it with their own origin story. And so understanding that story, and I'll see couples that wrestle with this later if they don't understand each other's origin story, and a child will bring out things much deeper than what they had before the child was born. And so they might be fine as a couple without a child, but once you add that child into the mix, things get much more intense. And so helping them navigate, what was your experience as a child growing up? What did your parents do that was helpful? What were things that you would think would be unhelpful, that were unhelpful, and that you would like to do differently? Having them have those conversations before the child is born, I think is helpful. That gets to the origin part. Setting up a growth mindset, I think, is the next one. And it's funny because the one that I've come to realize now, I see a lot of men in their late 30s and early 40s in because the spouse sent them because they were irritable and depressed. And it turns out the story they got was they were supposed to be individualistic, competitive, dominant, and stoic. And it turns out that leads to depression. And estrangement from the wife and kids. And now they're wondering, and I'm like, well, we can use a medication if you want, and that's certainly possible, but ultimately we just need to change the story you're working with. And so getting those stories out of there. So setting them up at the beginning so they can start not having that story. It was funny. I just read an article in the New York Times about a guy who had done research on the idea of fatherhood. And it seems most fathers through history and what he had looked at just had insecurity. They had this massive dose of insecurity. They thought they were gods and that they were always right. And if you do what I say, then you're going to be okay. But it's bluster and bluff and following from by ancient, Middle East all the way up through the current time. And he's funny. I finally realized, wait a minute, why am I trying to see what other people think about dads? I'll just ask my son, what is a good dad? And the son said, a good dad is funny and is good at hugging. So it's like, shocking. You actually ask the person who's invested in this, like the child, what do they want in a dad? And so I think that was perfect. But there's a cluster of people doing research on parenting that have come up with something called self-determination theory, which looked at human psychological needs. And they found 3 of them and narrowed it down. The first person who was looking at it came up with like 20, but they were mostly guy wants and not needs. But it was the first time somebody asked the question, which is great. And so they then another group got it down to 12 and then 7. They got it down to 3. A separate group got it down to 2, but one of the 2 was 2 of theirs combined. So really 2 groups independently got it down to 3 things. Autonomy, which is an unfortunate term because the way they defined it was that your behavior and values match. It's not the Western, I get to do what I want. And so that's one. The second was competence. We like to have an effect on the environment. We like making things. We like finishing things. We like learning things. And then the third is relationship, just being important to someone else and having them be important to you. And so with those 3 psychological needs, then people went and asked a number of questions. What happens when somebody applies external motivation, either in their first question had been, why do people respond positively to rewards sometimes and not others? And it turns out it depended on the intrinsic needs. So they went down that rabbit hole. But when they were working on that question, they found that sometimes an external motivation, if it gets internalized but doesn't match the self, that becomes something called an introjection. And these are external motivations that have been internalized. And a hospice nurse in Australia had made a blog about, and then a book about the regrets she saw in her patients. And the number one regret was, her name is Bronnie Ware. The number one regret was, I wish I'd lived the life I wanted, not what was expected. And so that's an introjection. And those introjections, they had another group that looked at the question of what life goals lead to satisfaction and which ones don't. And it turns out job title, money, prestige, appearance, all of those things lead to depression. They do not lead to life satisfaction. And so how do we set up parents not to have those things? It gets to be very difficult to try and impart that much information onto them as they're going. And so sometimes I'll use references that they can turn to try and learn the information, because ultimately it's funny. It's all about learning. Nobody's perfect, and we're all learning along the way. And I had a dream when I was 11 that in the dream, someone gave me the meaning of life. And it was so profound and it was so simple. I was so stunned. I couldn't believe it was that easy. And I was so excited. I woke up and I went to write it down, and it was pitch black in the room. I couldn't find a pen or a paper. And but it was so profound that I'll just write it down in the morning. Of course, it was gone the next morning. And so I told my grandson, and when he was 11, and he just goes, well, maybe the meaning of life is just to learn from your mistakes. Like, oh my God, that was probably it. He was thinking like the mistake of not writing it down. But to be honest, that is a huge chunk of it. Nobody's perfect. And I don't worry about being wrong. when somebody gives me feedback, because shoot, if I look back at what I did 20 years ago, I don't agree with everything I did then anyway. It's like, if I can't even agree with myself, why would I worry about being right or wrong now? If somebody gives me feedback, I'm like, oh, hey, that's great. And so I've got a few patients that actually give me very honest feedback sometimes. Well, that's biased. I'm like, oh, wait, let's unpack this. You're right. I do have that hidden bias that I wasn't aware of. I'll say something and realize the underlying. So whenever you say something, there's an underlying belief, and under that is identities, assumptions, and values. And so sometimes you're not aware of what those values are until you say something like, oh, shoot, I didn't realize I had that value. That's a biased one. So learning from mistakes is key, and for that I often turn to Carol Dweck's work, and her book Self Theories is probably one of the easier ones to digest. She has one called Mindset that's written for the lay public, but it's very dilute in the concept, and it has a lot of stories about people, but not the experiments that she did, which I thought were quite enlightening. So I liked her book Self Theories, and that one, she just talks as a narrative. There's no math, there's no jargon. It's just a narrative of what her question was, what the experiment was, how it was designed, what the result was, what it meant, and then the next question. She had started with the question of, why did people persist in the face of failure sometimes and other times they quit? And so the least differentiated people to work with, so the least complex with the number of variables to work on, were children. So she made a whole bunch of kids fail to see what would happen. And it was just very enlightening as she worked through her career about a growth mindset. So you can understand the concept, but when you read the story of what the experiments were, it really becomes more internalized. And so I'll see folks really wrestling with that failure and what it means. They think, if I don't get this job, I'm a failure. I applied to ENT and didn't get in. Am I a failure because I didn't get there? Did I fall short? I don't think so. That's where Winding Path comes in. It's like, no, we're just finding our place. If prestige isn't it, life satisfaction, it actually comes more from what knowledge you acquired that you can share with others. The Lakota call it, if I pronounce it right, it goes something like wakshape. It's the obligation to share knowledge so that others will have better health and happiness. So that's one of the challenges in the current healthcare environment, is that it's not built for that. We actually don't do mind. So health is the other thing that I've encountered. The question of what is health? In med school, they talked a lot about the biopsychosocial model, Rauschenbrenner and all of that. And it actually falls quite short. The World Health Organization doesn't have a great definition of health either. It finishes with something like, and not merely the absence of disease, but death and aging are normal. So that's not it either. Our DO friends, actually, the osteopaths, actually look at health as mind, body, and spirit, which is a much more holistic view. It still pulls the individual out from context. And of course, we're not in a closed system. We're actually connected to other people and things and living things around us. And so I think a broader one is mind, body, spirit, and community. It would be the four domains of health. And so someone can be, I've seen people who are dying who were incredibly healthy. They were the happiest people, satisfied, and just so at peace. It's just amazing. And you're like, wow, that's my idea of health, is the absence of disease. Why would we set it up that way? Everybody ends in failure. That doesn't sound quite right. You know, when you focus on cures, you're setting everybody up for failure, because all cures inevitably run out. So it's like, how do we set people up to get? So then it got me back into that question. Well, what is a legacy then? If the body's going to break and everybody, passes away eventually, what is the legacy? And it looks more like the wave of change we have in others. It's not an object. And so it's a weird quirk of English that legacy is a noun, but it's actually the wave of change. So when you make somebody else's day better, and then they go on to make someone else's day better, that wave of change is what your legacy ends up being. And so the knowledge that you acquire and that you share, that knowledge that goes on, ends up being your legacy, not an object. So then, you back it up. And how do I help parents so that they can raise a child who can have a wave of change and be satisfied with that? Is an interesting deal.
Seems like over time and experience, you found a way to capture that ethos of medicine as a practice. Practice leaves room for mistakes. In a world where there's a lack of empathy, a lack of perspective, a lack of patience, how have you found, one, in your role as a grandfather, and second, a role as a teaching physician in your organization? How have you found that you've been able to captivate everything that you've spoken about and leave that as your legacy?
Incorporate it into talks now, actually.
Mm.
I've shared and I keep adding to it as I go. It's refining. My first question, I think probably 15 years ago, I saw somebody who was in their mid 20s, who was not an independent adult. And then I started noticing a number of patients that were like that. I would ask a 25-year-old something, and the parent would lean over behind them and answer the question, like, "Why are you even here?" And so I started asking, how do we get folks to help children get to adulthood independent, resilient? Had looked into that. There's a handbook of parenting, volumes 1 through 5, which has all the research on parenting. It has a lot of information. Unfortunately, it's a research handbook. It's not really intended for the lay public. So I think a quarter to a third of the pages are fine print references. And so it's all research based. But I would pick up things about, I started picking up things to help parents grow in that direction. But then as I learned and started seeing people getting through life satisfied and not, and then it was actually this year is when it hit, when I had somebody in their 90s admitted for passive suicidal wish. We're like, wait a minute, at that age, most folks they're done. They're ready to go. They're like, oh, I had one tell me, I think God forgot about me. And then I had somebody else who was passing, in the act of dying, who was happy as a clam. And that's when, you learn. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm learning from my patients. Wait a minute, maybe step back and go, what is health? Because here I have two people who are completely healthy, but their bodies are breaking. And then once you back that up, you're like, oh, wait a minute, okay, how do I incorporate that knowledge then to help and share it with others? And so it's been an interesting process. So I incorporated into a talk, made a talk. The residents prodded me into it, like, hey, we want you to talk about this. And so I made it, and then they gave me feedback. And from the feedback, and then as I learn more from patients, I keep refining it and keep adding to it. So I continue to share the knowledge. So the knowledge I shared 15 years ago was about parenting and launching kids. And then now it's moved on to the broader range of life, not just to adulthood, but all the way through.
There's a lot of content, a lot of stuff you're saying that, to be honest, I'm going to have to listen to this conversation a few times to gather it. In the show notes, I'd like to reference a lot of what you've spoken about as well. But my last question as we close, I have to think about it here. If you can take all the experience that you've spoken about just now and imagine you're speaking to a young dad, how do you explain to them how to captivate a posture of joy and cultivate that atmosphere in his family?
If I had to sum it as something as simple as possible, I would say discover who your child is, because you have to see them and who they are and not your expectations. Your expectations actually become introjections for them that put them at risk for depression at the end of life. And so the funny part is we see folks, and society will try and give you these introjections. The faster the kids learn their letters and their numbers, the smarter they're going to be, the better career, the better job title, the more money they'll make. And so trying to relax, it turns out that if you relax and allow children to develop at their own pace, they actually have better executive function by middle school. And so just forget about what all these folks are saying about what your kids are supposed to do, and just have joy in discovering who they are. It's just amazing to watch these people unfold and to see what brings them joy, what they're interested in, what they have fun with. And then the Haida word for teaching actually has a root that means to learn. So you can, in the Haida language, you can never teach without learning in the process. And so I think that's a great approach for parenting, is that as you teach your children, and guide them into the skills that they need, allowing them to make mistakes along the way, get to adulthood. You learn from them along the way.
Mm, well said. Well said. Well, Dr. John, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to come and sit and have a conversation with me. A lot of stuff you said is just so profound, and I really hope the listeners, myself included, can digest all the things that you've shared and have said and have experienced over the years. So I couldn't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day to record this content.
And thank you so much for the opportunity. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.